Beyond the hardship of prison and fear of confinement lie crazy criminals ready to prey on new inmates for fun. But what happens when this new inmate is a female in a male prison?
This after it emerged that a transgender inmate had actually assaulted fellow prisoners after being sent to a women's prison.
Sounds impossible, but unfortunately, such prisons exist in some parts of the world, and if the walls of these prisons could talk, they would recount the most horrible stories in the world. This is what happens to females in male prisons. The tragic case of L.A.B. While many people have never heard of a female in a male prison, L.A.B.'s case exposed the public to the unbelievable realities of some countries' justice system. Back in 2007, this 15-year-old girl who was only identified as L.A.B. was arrested on October 21st for an alleged theft. She was accused of breaking into a house and stealing some items in Abatuba, Para, Brazil. But while there was no evidence that she actually committed the crime, the judge sentenced her to weeks in jail, and instead of taking her to a juvenile detention or women's prison, she was taken straight to men's prison in the same state. On getting there, she was thrown into a cell of 21 men who had been locked up for years, and for different heinous crimes. These are men who have stayed years behind bars, without seeing a woman, or being able to touch one throughout their stay. And suddenly, just like a hungry predator, waiting hopelessly to have prey in sight, these men preyed on L.A.B. As imagined, these men constantly essayed her, and even went physical with her. No matter how much she screamed, she was not heard. And for the days she struggled to get out of their grip, she was deprived of food for the whole day. Simply put, living hell on earth, because even the prison officials did nothing to help her. Even though anyone would have imagined the poor girl suffering in there. No one knew exactly how hellish her life was since getting into the prison until the story erupted in the national media. The scandal erupted when the case was reported to authorities on November 14, 2007 by the city's Guardian Council, which cares for minors. The girl reportedly revealed she was obliged to have forceful intimacy with not less than 2 inmates in a day in return for food, and showed bruises and cigarette burns on her body. By the girl's account, the prison officials were aware of what was going on, but they chose to do nothing about it for unknown reasons. However, the story outraged Brazilians who demanded her transfer to a women's prison, and of course, it was only then the Brazilian government took action to transfer her into protective custody. During an interview with the girl after her transfer from the jail, she reported how she was tortured by the male inmates with lit cigarettes on her fingers and bare feet to essay her daily. And the only time she had a break from obligatory sex was on Thursdays, when intimate visits were allowed. They took things further by cutting her hair to make her look more like a boy and difficult to recognize. The whole story makes you wonder how and why she ended up in a male prison in the first place, if there were female prisons in the state. Unfortunately, most towns do not have separate jails for men and women in the sprawling, largely lawless state of Para, where she was sentenced. And as for the question of her age, according to her father, he was threatened to produce a certificate to show that the girl was 20 when she was indeed 15. Soon, after the whole story came to light, Brazilian lawmakers announced an investigation into the state prison system and planned a congressional committee visit to investigate and recommend ways to improve the treatment of women and youthful offenders. Soon, 3 top police officials were suspended pending an investigation with the government's promise that the guilty parties would be punished in an exemplary fashion. L.A.B.'s case showed a serious case of criminal negligence against women, who in Brazil continue to be victims of prejudice, and it also paved the way for extensive reports of jail abuse days after the case was divulged. It was reported that a 23-year-old woman was also obliged to share a cell with 70 men in a police detention center in Parauapebas, in southern Para. It was not clear what happened to her, but it only shows that holding female inmates in male prisons is common in the state, and nothing has been done to put an end to it. The new reports show that the problem is not with the prison guards or the male inmates abusing the females, but with the system that has failed to separate the 2 genders. No matter how much you think about this story, it's all shades of sketchy. Firstly, the victim's father was threatened to provide a false age. Secondly, while the investigation was going on, the victim's family was receiving death threats. This has fueled speculation that people in power may be involved in an international negligence of the rights of women in the state. According to reports, The government also was investigating reports that the girl was arrested and jailed purposely for the sexual gratification of the prisoners, which makes a lot of sense because it was only the case of an alleged theft. Since the system has always been like that, it can only mean Brazilian women are the hidden victims of a crumbling detention system, and many cases of women abused under government custody have gone unreported or uninvestigated over the years. After L.A.B.'s case, there was a lot of quiet regarding such cases, which made it all seem like the problem was over until 2011, when the media got yet another story of an unknown 14-year-old. This teenager must not have taken the warnings of her parents seriously, as she trusted a stranger so much that it almost cost her her life. The girl, whose identity remains protected for her safety, was born in Santa Isabel do Pará, another municipality in Pará, Brazil, which is just a 2-hour drive from Abaetuba, where L.A.B. lived. Although her case was similar to L.A.B.'s, the difference is she is a year younger, and in her case, all that she did wrong was trust a total stranger. On that fateful day in 2011, the girl who was just by herself on a beach was approached by a strange woman who offered her domestic employment. But before you blame her for believing this woman, you must know that Brazil is a country with an increasing rate of unemployment. In 2023, the unemployment rate had risen by 8.6%, which may seem like a very small number, especially if you compare it with other countries that have double figures. However, 8.6% for Brazil means 9 million people who were unemployed and were struggling to survive. This explains why the teenager took immediate action and followed the strange woman. They both got into her vehicle, where she was joined with 2 other teenagers, but instead of driving to an employment site where they were supposedly going to be employed, the car headed for Santa Isabel Penal Colony. In case the name rings a bell, you must have heard about one of the worst male penitentiary facilities in the whole of Pará, Brazil, where prisoners are not scared of prison guards. The inmates have immense power in this facility and are only locked up for the protection of the guards. In other words, the guards are the prisoners in Santa Isabel Penal Colony. For the sake of those who don't know how brutal this prison is, let's discuss the 2018 prison war that took the lives of many. On that gory day, gunmen blasted the walls of the prison with grenades and shot through the prison bars to let some inmates escape. Unfortunately, some guards were caught in the middle with heavily armed men on the outside, and even more armed men on the inside fighting back. At the end of the chaos, 20 people had lost their lives, including prison guards and inmates. This is the same prison this strange woman took the 3 teenagers, including this 14-year-old. It soon became known to the girls that they had been kidnapped for a sex trade in return for a handsome load of cash. This prison is not like the one L.A.B. was sentenced to. It is more brutal. While L.A.B. had to face 21 men, these girls were thrown into a prison of not 20, not 60, not 100, but 350 prison inmates. How the woman was able to gain access into the prison to execute this deal is unknown, but you must have guessed almost anything is possible when you have money. According to the 14-year-old, they were forced to take illegal drugs, drink a scary amount of alcohol, beaten multiple times, and of course all 3 were SA'd. While these girls were gone, their families thought they were only missing, unknown to them that they were behind bars without committing a crime. Luckily for this 14-year-old, on the 4th day, a prison guard agreed to help her escape out of jail. As soon as she was out, she was faced with a forest where wild animals are presumed to roam, and she had to choose whether to boldly face wild animals that could only be a myth, or go back inside to meet 350 real animals waiting to devour her. Eventually, she took the first option and kept running in the wild. She soon located a police station where she narrated her story, stating that she had been abused by too many men that she had lost count. She also mentioned that the 2 other teenagers were still in there, but it is unclear what fate they faced. Immediately, the story caught the public's attention. The director of the prison and 19 other people working there between the night the girls were taken there and when she escaped were fired. Undoubtedly, these are pathetic stories of women who were powerless and left to face the brutal realities of the unjust justice system. But before we proceed, let's go into our subscribers pick. These cases remind us of the case of a woman who was also thrown into the men's prison in Brazil, but in her case, her story took an unexpected turn. She was constantly abused physically, and in any other brutal way imagined, but of course, this is what happens to females in male prison. However, what made her case different was the fact that one of the prison guards was also forcefully getting intimate with her. And it all started after this guard, who was said to be over 6 feet tall and heavily built, was able to stop the male inmates. But unknown to this woman, her problems had just begun. This guard would essay and also threaten her not to tell anyone about it. For fear of what might happen to her, she was quiet about it until she discovered that she was pregnant. Her pregnancy could not be hidden, and so, after she was questioned, she mentioned the prison guard as the perpetrator. In the end, the guard was only suspended, and the woman's child was cared for by the government. In an interview after her release, she mentioned that she didn't want to fight against the guard because the safety of her child is more important to her, and that the child means a lot to her. According to reports, the woman never got married after her release, and so the child remained her only child. What do you think about the guard's punishment and the woman's decision? Let us know in the comments section. While this woman had a happy ending on her part, the same can't be said for Vicky Thompson. Unlike everyone else on this list, Vicky was a transgender woman who was sent to a male's prison because she was biologically a male. She was in prison after breaching an order relating to a shoplifting conviction and had failed to attend 2 probation appointments. But even though she was a male, she was not treated as such in the male's prison. While in jail, Vicky reported 3 allegations of sexual offenses committed between 2007 and 2011. In the same case, detectives interviewed 3 men, but none of them were charged. On October 19, 2015, she also complained of bullying and received a card under her door addressed to Wifey from another prisoner inviting her to spend the night in his cell. She began to have suicidal thoughts, and for that, she was put on suicide watch because of a long history of self-harm, as well as drug and alcohol abuse. But soon, her risk levels were downgraded, and she was checked on only once an hour. Then one night on November 13, 2015, while the prison was short-staffed, only one officer was assigned to her wing, working overtime after his day shift. That night, the officer had been dealing with numerous fire alarms throughout the evening, while other officers struggled to keep control amid an epidemic of spice and other highly addictive forms of synthetic cannabis, smuggled in and taken by many prisoners. Soon, staff wore riot gear to enter a cell in the segregation unit, home to the most dangerous prisoners, and the same unit Vicky was kept in. But by the time she was found alone in the dark because of a broken light, it was too late. Vicky was found dead, hanged in her cell. It was just as Vicky had predicted on her way to jail, as she told people that she would leave in a box, which means leave in a coffin, if she was sent to a male's prison. Eventually, the jury concluded unanimously that she had not meant to take her own life, as they sent her to HMP Leeds, despite her partner and one drug treatment nurse at the prison insisting she had said she wanted to be transferred to a female jail. The only thing the jury agreed to was that regardless of whether Vicky was feeling high or low in moods and appeared to be coping in prison, more attention should have been paid to her as a transgender woman with mental health issues and a history of self-harming and suicide threats. If more attention had been paid to her, they might have been able to prevent her death. But the judge had put her in prison because they believed Vicky had not gone for medical treatment for gender reassignment. According to Whittle, a professor of equalities law at Manchester Metropolitan University who transitioned over 40 years ago, it shouldn't matter that Vicky hadn't begun medical treatment for gender reassignment. As far as the Equalities Act is concerned, reassignment is social, not medical, so she should have been treated like any other young woman entering prison. She also said, "The problem is, prisoners can't easily make a claim under the Equalities Act." Vicky's story is a sad one, as her life has always been hard. She was named Reese Robert Richard Thompson when she was born in February 1994 in Cadley. She was just a few months old when she was first taken into care after being found with bruises on her face and finger marks on her hand. Her mother, Lisa Harrison, who was an alcoholic, was suspected, but she denied ever abusing her child, saying she could not possibly have done it because she only has 3 fingers on one hand. She also mentioned the only time she was not happy with Vicky was when she started dressing in girls' clothes and said she was not a boy at age 11. And by age 12, Vicky lost her virginity to a male friend of her aunt's. Again, Social services intervened and she was sent to foster carers in Newark. At age 17, she changed her name to Vicky Louise Angie Jade Thompson, and since then, everyone in Keeley knew her as a woman. According to her mother, she never began gender reassignment treatment, as doctors had advised she needed to tackle her drug and alcohol problems before she began to transition. And so, because she had never applied for a gender recognition certificate, she was sent to a male prison as per prison guidelines. Before her death, she wrote a letter to her partner, Bob Steele, which suggests she was going to do something terrible to herself. The letter reads, "I just feel like I won't be here no more. I don't know when I'm getting out of here. My head is so I know I'm going to do something silly. I don't want to, but I can't do this." The next Bob would hear of his partner was the news of her death, which was an irreversible damage. While Vicky Thompson could not bear what she went through, this next woman did all she could to survive. Tera Hudson. Tera is also a transgender woman like Vicky, but nothing much about Tera was womanly, not even the offense that got her behind bars. Tera was born male, but has lived her entire adult life as a woman, and recognized as the same at least until she admitted assault over a Boxing Day bar fight by headbutting a man. She was then sent to HMP Bristol for her crime, a place Vicky believed she didn't belong. Soon, she started to complain about sexual harassment by other prisoners and also maltreatment within the prison walls. In her first phone call home since being jailed, Tera told her mother, Jackie Brooklyn, that she has become the victim of sexual harassment and innuendos, confirming the worst fears of her family and supporters. According to her mother, she was allowed to speak to Tera for about 2 minutes. At the time, she told her mother that she was in a cell next to someone who had tried to commit suicide 6 times since she'd been there, and her mother could hear inmates screaming from their cells. "Tera, Tera, Tera, show us your tits." For days after Tera was locked up, she was only given fresh underwear to change into after she had been wearing the same clothes for 6 days. In her case, she was kept in isolation for 23 hours in the healthcare wing, away from the general population, which was in a way better than being kept with men she didn't want to be with. But every time she was allowed out, she was harassed by other inmates. While the law and guidelines believe that transgender women should be in a men's prison, they are at real risk, especially in a prison like HMP Bristol, which has been singled out by HM Inspectorate of Prisons for levels of violence considerably higher than in similar prisons. Statistics have shown that transgender women in all-male prisons are 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than the general prison population. Also, 59% have reported SA at the hands of both prisoners and staff. When you look at Tara, you'll see how much she looks like a biological woman, but she was born a boy. However, her family mentioned that they all agreed earlier in her life that she was born into the wrong body, as she knew she wanted to be a girl at the age of 5. At age 20, Tera began the surgical and hormone treatments needed to make the full transition from male to female, which gave her the really big boobs she has today. But while her mother feared for her life behind walls, Tera devised a means to survive, which was flashing fellow inmates to avoid being sad and beaten. In case you don't understand what flashing means, it means Tera was showing herself to other inmates without clothes on to satisfy their urges. Most times some of them would masturbate as she showed her body to them through her food hatch, saving her from the fate most women suffered from male inmates. However, Tera didn't stay long there, as she was moved after heavy public campaigning and a 150-strong petition. She was moved to a smaller women's prison in Gloucestershire. After her release from jail, she granted several interviews where she recounted her experience from the first night she got to the prison. She said, "When I walked into the prison, it was like a cat with 5 legs had entered the building. They were like animals in a zoo, shouting and banging on the doors. Everyone thought I was an ordinary woman, and they hadn't seen one in a long time." She mentioned how the guards were confused as to why she was there and the look of panic on their faces when they greeted her at the reception, as they were confused about how they were supposed to treat her. She also said, "One whole side of the wing, about 10 men, was shouting at me on my first night. It was intense, aggressive, and extremely uncomfortable. Within hours of being there, I was bullied into showing my through the hatch in my door." Also, she spoke about how the whole atmosphere was filled with anger and violence that could not be curbed or stopped. She immediately felt she didn't belong there, And fortunately for her, her whole bitter experience didn't go on for too long before she got her partial freedom. Fortunately for her, she couldn't dwell much on her suicidal thoughts before she was released, but she probably would leave with the trauma throughout her life. What do you think about the cases of women in men's cells? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.